Hare Krishna, welcome to today's live reading from Brilliant as the Sun, a retelling of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, the Sages of Naimisharanya. By His Grace, Krishna Dharma and Her Grace Chintamani Dham Mataji. We're going to begin the chapter 7, the Pandavas and Krishna. In answer to Shaunak's queries, Sutta relates three stories: Vyasadev's meditation after Narad's departure, Shukadev's history, and the background of Parikshit's birth. In so doing, he gives a very dramatic account of the events following the Pandavas' victory of Kurukshetra. Chapter 7, verses 1 to 3. When calm again prevailed, Shaunak asked, "What did Vyasadev do after Narad left?" Sutta replied that Vyasadev remained at his hermitage on the western bank of the river Saraswati. In a small cottage surrounded by berry trees, he sat down and began to meditate. Why did the great sage not leave home to engage in spiritual practice as is the custom? Asked Shaunak in surprise. Vyasadev's ashram is situated at Samyaprash, where he had previously compiled the Vedas, replied Sutta. He stayed there because the atmosphere is most suitable for spiritual engagement. Please listen as I tell you what transpired. Chapter 7, verses 4 to 7. Meditating with a completely tranquil mind, Vyasadeva in trance saw Krishna. With him were his energies and expansions, including the living entities. Maya, the material energy, stood behind the Lord. Vyasadeva saw the souls becoming allured by Maya. By her influence, they falsely identified with matter and began to suffer the material existence. He became pensive. Plainly, the soul's perverted attraction for Maya was the cause of their delusion and suffering. How could they be saved? Then he saw some of the souls developing an attraction for Krishna. As their love for attraction for Krishna increased, the Lord ordered Maya to release them, and they awoke to their blissful spiritual identity. Vyasadeva was astonished. How had this happened? As he continued to meditate, he realized they were hearing narrations of Krishna's pastimes and glories. The Srimad Bhagavatam, he saw how, by listening to the sacred text, the materially conditioned soul's love for Krishna blossomed. They became enthusiastic to exclusively serve him, thus attracting his protection. Of course, that was Narad's point. Simply by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, an attraction for the Lord's loving service sprouts up in the heart, extinguishing the fire of lamentation, illusion, and fearfulness. Vyasadeva fell to the ground, overwhelmed with ecstasy. The Lord was so great and merciful that one only had to hear about him to overcome and become free of ignorance and pain. He shed profuse tears of joy. Gradually he calmed himself and immediately began to write the Srimad Bhagavatam. Chapter 7, verses 8 to 11. Sutta concluded his description. When the divine literature was completed, Vyasadeva taught it to his son Shukadeva. How was that possible? Shaunak asked. I have heard that Shukadeva, who was self-realized from birth, left home before even receiving the customary rites of passage. Sutta replied, You have heard correctly, my dear friend. Shukadeva went to a solitary place to meditate on the impersonal Brahman. However, when Vyasadeva completed his work, he instructed two of his disciples to go to his son and recite. Remember, Shukadeva is the son of Vyasadeva, and recite several verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Upon hearing these verses, Shukadeva's heart became attracted to Krishna, and he returned to his father's ashram to receive further instructions from him. Shaunak remained doubtful. What need is there for a fully realized soul who is already detached from the family connections to learn the Srimad Bhagavatam? A broad smile lit up Suta's face. My dear friends, he said, not only can the beautiful narrations of Krishna's pastimes liberate the suffering souls, but they also appeal to liberated souls. Although such elevated personalities have no interest in fleeting sensual pleasure, they take great delight in hearing these transcendental discourses. Thus, even though Shukadev was immersed in Brahman meditation, when he overheard the devotees reciting the Bhagavatam, his heart was profoundly attracted to Krishna and he desired to hear more. Tell us the verses which enchanted Shukadev's mind. Sutta replied, the first spoken to Yudhishthir by Bhishma was, O king, that person whom out of ignorance only you thought to be your maternal cousin, your very dear friend, well-wisher, counselor, messenger and benefactor is the personality of Godhead, Krishna. The next verse was spoken by the great devotee Uddhav. Alas, how shall I take the shelter of one more merciful than he who granted the position of mother to the she-demon Putana, although she was of faithless and smeared her breast with deadly poison for the Lord to suck. Sutta recited another verse, and when he had finished, many of the sages sat stunned in ecstasy, others wept, and still others laughed ecstatically. Shaunak's limbs trembled and his bodily hair stood erect. Gradually he composed himself and said, my mind is bewildered. I had other questions I wanted to ask, but I can hardly remember them. All I want now is to hear more about Krishna. Sutta, who was also feeling overwhelmed with spiritual emotion, encouraged his friend, let us not leave any room for doubts. Take a moment to remember your questions. Shaunak pulled himself up straight and breathed deeply. Gradually his memory returned. You told us that Shukadev recited the Srimad Bhagavatam to Parikshit when the emperor was fasting to death by the banks of the Ganges. Yes, Sutta replied, what is the confusion? Chapter 4, verses 6 to 14, Shaunak answered, I have heard that Shukadev walked about naked, pretending to be dumb and senseless so that the materialistic persons would not speak to him. Indeed, I have also heard that he was generally considered to be mad. Laughing, he related an incident he had heard demonstrating Shukadev's aloofness from material existence. Once Shukadev, naked as usual, wandered near a lake where a group of celestial damsels were bathing. These ladies had not been disturbed to see him, as he made no distinction between the male and female. When Vyasadeva, following his son, passed by them, those same ladies quickly covered themselves. This was because, unlike Shukadev, it was apparent Vyasadeva recognized the difference between male and female. Unfortunately, most people interpret his detachment to be the sign of insanity. So how did Parikshit recognize him to be a self-realized soul and agree to hear from him? Sutta said, wonderful question. I will explain. Do you have any other doubts? Shaunak replied, it also amazes me that Shukadev agreed to instruct Emperor Parikshit for 7 days and nights. I have been told that normally he never associated with materialists for longer than it took to receive a cup of milk. Even that brief connection was simply in order to benefit the giver. Actually, he did not need their charity as he depended fully on Krishna. So how is it that he sat for 1 week with the world emperor? Sutta said, another excellent question. Do you have any other further questions? Shaunak continued, I am also intrigued as to why Emperor Parikshit gave up his kingdomship and protection. As a great devotee, surely he had a sense of responsibility for everyone's welfare. Even other kings looked to him for guidance and protection. He was not materially attached and performed his kingly duties. in the spirit of pure devotional service to Krishna. So why did he give up his God-given duty and fast to death? Chapter 7, verses 12 and 13. Shaunak stopped and sat back. He shook his head slightly. Am I wasting our time with these questions? Maybe you should just tell us about Krishna. After hearing those sublime verses, I think we only want to hear his glories. Some sages in the assembly called out in agreement, yes, please tell us about Krishna's pastimes. Others, however, disagreed. We had also these doubts that Shaunak expressed. Please first dispel them for us. Sutta held up his hand to quieten the audience. My friends, be peaceful. I shall speak about Krishna's pastimes while simultaneously answering your questions. You need first to understand about Parikshit's exalted birth and heritage. He was the posthumous son of Abhimanyu, the son of Arjun and Subhadra. Thus the emperor was Krishna's grandnephew. Shaunak expressed surprise. Parikshit was directly related to Krishna. Sutta nodded, certainly. Shaunak's face lit up. I think I understand how he was able to recognize Shukadev and why that esteemed sage spent so much time with him. As Krishna's relation, Parikshit must have been a great saint himself. Yes, you have understood my point. He was a pure devotee from his very birth. Indeed, he saw the Lord in the womb when Kaurav warrior Ashwathama tried to kill him with the Brahmastra missile. Shaunak frowned. Why did Ashwathama hurl the most deadly weapon at an unborn child? And how is it Parikshit did not die at that time? I will explain, said Sutta. Let us pick up the story from the first day after Pandavas defeated Duryodhan in the battle of Kurukshetra. Chapter 7, verses 14 to 57. Yudhishthir sat regally amid his brothers along with Draupadi and Krishna. They had just spent their victory night in Duryodhan's deserted tent. Finally, the nightmare of their persecution at the Kuru's hands was over. You have a long day ahead of you, Emperor, said Krishna. After breakfast, you should return to your own camp and meet with your generals. As they broke their fast, a commotion arose outside. They heard the shrill voice of a hysterical man demanding to see the emperor and the gruff tones of the guards forbidding him. Following the sounds of a scuffle, concerned Yudhishthir asked for the distressed man to be brought before him. Soon a disheveled and shaking man entered, flanked by 2 armed guards. Seeing Yudhishthir, he fell flat to the ground, weeping, My lord, they are all dead. Who? Demanded Yudhishthir. And who are you, my good sir? The man, visibly shaken, remained weeping on the floor, repeatedly muttering, They are all dead. Intrigued, Bhima rose from his seat and helped the trembling newcomer to his feet. Examining him closely, he exclaimed, Apat. The man touched Bhima's feet in respect. Yes, Lord, it is I. Bhima turned to Yudhishthir and said, He is cook in your army, brother. Greeted warmly by Pandavas and Krishna's, Apat was encouraged to speak. He told them how the previous night the head cook had ordered him to go to the river to collect water for breakfast. When he returned, he saw the camp ablaze and he could hear men screaming. He hurried toward the entrance where he saw Kripacharya in full armor, holding a drawn sword and guarding the gate. As he approached them, some panicked soldiers rushed out of the camp. To Apat's horror, Kripacharya mercilessly cut down those unarmed and frightened men. Terrified, Apat then hid in the bushes. Around an hour later, Ashwathama emerged covered in blood, holding his sword aloft in one hand and in the other a large sack from which the blood dripped endlessly. Laughing like a madman, he asked Kripacharya, Did any escape? A few tried, but I killed them just as you ordered, General. Apat continued. When the 2 had left, I entered our camp, going from tent to tent, and I saw everyone had been slain. My sons, my brothers, cried Draupadi, jumping up from her seat in extreme agitation. Apat looked down and made no reply. As the Pandavas stared at him in horror, Draupadi swooned. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Duryodhan lay with his legs awkwardly trapped under his thigh, his drawn sword on the bare earth by his side, As the sun brightened the horizon, the snarling jackals surrounding him backed off, exhausted from his efforts to keep them at bay. He tried to lie back but could not because of his leg's awkward position. Gently he attempted to ease his limb down, but unbearable pain seeped through his body and made him cry out in anguish. Strenuously keeping himself propped up and up with his elbows, he looked down at his bloodied thigh. He cursed Bhim. How could that evil-minded Pandav have struck him below the waist? Duryodhana's breath came rapidly. He did not have the strength to keep himself up for much longer. Gritting his teeth, he made one more Herculean effort to dislodge his foot and straighten his leg. The pain was so severe, he lost consciousness. Slowly coming round, he heard a low voice say, "Curses on those loathsome Pandavas. Look what they have done to the king." A heavy hand stroked Duryodhana's brow, and he felt cool water on his lips. Slowly opening his eyes, he saw a blur which gradually formed into Ashwatthama's face. "Thank God you're still alive," Ashwatthama cried out. Duryodhana closed his eyes. Hot tears streamed down his face. "My friend," he rasped, "all is lost. I cannot survive much longer. Flee while you can." Ashwatthama spoke heatedly. "My lord, I have wreaked revenge on your enemies. I single-handedly killed the Pandavas and their entire army." Duryodhana again opened his eyes with difficulty, straining against the pain that racked his whole body. "The Pandavas are dead," he exclaimed. He looked doubtfully at his general. How could Ashwatthama alone have accomplished what he, with all his royal resources, had not been able to achieve throughout his entire life? "I cannot believe you," he cried. "I have proof," Ashwatthama declared. "See what I have brought." Ashwatthama picked up the bloodied sack which lay on the ground next to him and tipped out its macabre contents. 5 severed heads rolled onto the ground, their sightless eyes staring out of their pallid faces. "I killed them while they slept," said Ashwatthama with a harsh laugh. Duryodhana strained to recognize the 5 faces of his enemies. "Let me touch, I will be able to tell their features with my hands." Ashwatthama placed the decapitated head of Bhima's son in Duryodhana's hand. "Behold the head of your nemesis Bhima." Duryodhana eagerly ran his finger over his nose, eyes and mouth. Yes, this was Bhima. He was finally slain. Duryodhana thanked Providence. He had lived long enough to see the death of his sworn enemy. "I congratulate you on your chivalry, General Ashwatthama." As Ashwatthama smiled proudly, Duryodhana curled his fingers around the skull and squeezed it, imagining he was personally destroying Bhima. To his surprise and dismay, it caved in under a little pressure. "This cannot be Bhim's skull. His entire body is like iron." Turning disappointedly towards Ashwatthama, he demanded, "Tell me the truth. Who was this man?" Ashwatthama sighed. "Very well, it is not Bhima, but his son, Suta Soma. These others are Draupadi's. These other 4 are Draupadi's other sons. Why did you lie to me?" "The son is considered the same as father, so I did not exactly lie," protested Ashwatthama. "You heinous fool," exclaimed Duryodhana, shrinking back in shame. Ashwatthama spoke. "I just wanted to make you happy before you left." Duryodhana's head fell back to the ground in despair and snarled, "How could you think this vile act would please me? I had no quarrel with these boys. They were the last surviving males in our dynasty. How will the Kurus survive now?" Grimacing with pain, Duryodhana turned his head away from Ashwatthama. "Leave me, I do not want to see your face." Ashwatthama stood up, his face a mask of dismay. Looking around fearfully, he stumbled back toward his horse. If Duryodhana was so disgusted with him, he dared not imagine what the Pandavas were thinking. He needed to flee before they found him. Back in Duryodhana's royal tent, the 5 Pandavas and Krishna gently tried to revive Draupadi, picking her up in his arms. Bhim placed her on a couch. They wiped her forehead with a damp cloth. When she opened her eyes, she again remembered the frightful news and cried piteously, "Oh, my sons, my sons." His grief and fury rising, Arjun picked up his bow, known as the Gandiv, and addressed his inconsolable wife, "Gentle lady, when I present you with that wretched Brahman's head, after beheading him with arrows from my Gandiv bow, I shall wipe the tears from your eyes and pacify you. Then after burning your sons' bodies, you can take your ritual bath standing on his head." Touching Yudhishthir's feet, he requested, "Grant me permission to depart, dear brother." Yudhishthir nodded, "Go, but be cautious. Arjun, Ashwathama has lost all sense of morality. He is unpredictable and dangerous." Krishna stepped forward and also touched Yudhishthir's feet. "Please allow me to accompany my friend." Okay, we will continue with our reading next time. Thanks for joining. Hariam Tat Sat. Hare Krishna.